Greetings and welcome to another episode of Pandegesis, where we discuss topics exegetically with a pantheistic perspective. Today's episode is entitled The Revelation, Prophecy or Kwentong Barbero. This will be a series where we will be discussing topics of the last days. Since the world today is concentrated or focused on the idea of the last days because of the war going on in the Middle East. So I have decided to focus our time and to give a series on the book of Revelation. So again, our title is The Revelation, Prophecy or Kwentong Barbero. And today, we will have an introduction of our direction for the coming episodes. But first, may I be candid with you and tell you something about my childhood. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. She is a wide reader and she used to tell me stories, bedtime stories when I was young. She reads a lot of books and before going to sleep, she would tell me stories. And today, I would be your storyteller. Have you heard of the story or the epic of the Arabian Nights? For you who have, for those of you who know, the Arabian Nights is a series of stories. Let's say make believe stories. It's either mythology or metaphor or just wonderful stories good for children. And one of the stories I heard is, or my mother told me, is entitled A Thousand and One Nights. I hope you've heard of the story so that at least we can communicate about that story and then we bring the meaning of that story into our discussion of the book of Revelation. So, the story of the 1001 Nights. It's a story of a girl. Her name is Scheherarud. It's difficult to pronounce, but it will be available to you so you can read it. Shehera Rusad. Anyway, okay. Let's just say Shehera. It's not complete, but just call her Shehera. So the story goes that long ago in a distant kingdom, there ruled a king named Shahryar. He was married, but he was betrayed by his queen, infidelity. And with that, he came to believe that all women were unfaithful. In his bitterness, he made a terrible decree. Each night, he would marry a new bride. By morning, that bride will be executed, and he will be marrying another bride, another woman. Now, that's something. And so, fear gripped the land. No family was safe. No daughter, especially if beautiful, was secure. Many have died. Many have been executed. Then came this lady, Shihirasud. She is the daughter of one of the king's advisors. And being the daughter of an educated man, this lady is wise, brave, educated, and learned a lot in the art of storytelling. She actually volunteered to marry the king. On their wedding night, instead of pleading for her life, she began to tell a story. And the story was captivating, filled with wonder, suspense, mystery, all the good things you think should be included in a captivating story. She's got it. The king listened. Hours passed. But before the story reached its finale, she stopped and she told the king, let's continue tomorrow. I will tell you how it ends. The king, curious and restless, spared her life for one more day. The next night, she continued the story. She finished the story because there's only a small portion left and then asked the king, would you like another story, Your Majesty? And the king said yes. So she began another story, but cut it at the finale, at the climax. Again, she stopped before ending. So night after night, she told stories, she wove tales, adventure, love, betrayal, magic, wisdom. And night after night, the king delayed her execution, eager to hear more. And this is where we get the title of the story because it continued for 1,001 nights. Now we are told that after that, the attitude of the king changed. Once hardened by betrayal, he was softened. Through the stories of this lady, he discovered trust, compassion, and humanity. And at last, he abandoned his cruel decree. And Sheherod's, not by force, but by the power of narrative, saved not only her own life, but the lives of countless other ladies. Beautiful story. And you might be thinking, hey, Brother Abe, how is that related to Revelation, the end of days? Well, wait, just like Sheherud, there is tension, there is climax, there is anticipation. Let us continue. In Arabian Nights, there are other stories. And maybe you have heard of the story of Aladdin. Aladdin and the magic lamp. In a bustling city lived a poor but carefree young man named Aladdin. So goes the story. He was clever but lazy and often go into trouble. One day, a mysterious sorcerer approached him, pretending to be his long lost uncle. The sorcerer led Aladdin to a hidden cave filled with unimaginable treasures gold, diamond, ruby, all sorts of treasures. But he had only one request. This sorcerer had only one request. He told Aladdin, bring me an old oil lamp from the inside. Aladdin entered the cave and found the lamp. But when he refused to hand it over before being helped out, the sorcerer trapped him inside. Alone and afraid, Aladdin rubbed the lamp, and suddenly a powerful genie appeared. Now, if your mother is like my mother, you might have heard of this story and a lot more. But anyway, it's my time to tell the story, so continue to listen. And the genie said, I am the servant of the lamp, the genie declared. Your wish is my command. So with the genie's help, Aladdin escaped the cave. Over time, he used the genie's power to gain wealth, build a magnificent palace, and win the hand of a beautiful princess. But the story does not end there. The sorcerer returned, tricked the princess into giving him the lamp, and seized its power. And Aladdin lost everything. Yet through courage, wit, and determination, Aladdin recovered the lamp, defeated the sorcerer, and restored his life. In the end, he learned that true worth lies not in magic, but in character. Now, if you're beginning to feel like a child, I hope you are, then that's good. And you might still be thinking, hey, Brother Ave, didn't you say we're going to discuss Revelation? How is that story related to Revelation? Wait, we will go there in just a while. One more story. Maybe you have heard the story of Ali Baba and the 40 thieves. Ali Baba was a poor woodcutter who lived a simple life. One day, while gathering wood in the forest, he saw a group of thieves approach a hidden cave. Then one of them, their leader, spoke the words, Open Sesame! And the rock opened, revealing a treasure-filled cave. After the thieves left, Ali Baba cautiously approached and repeated the words, Open Sesame! The cave opened, and inside he found gold, jewels, and riches beyond imagination. He took only what he needed and returned home. But his secret did not remain hidden. He has a greedy brother. Learning of the treasure, the brother went to the cave. But in his excitement, he forgot the magic words. He was able to enter, of course, but coming out, he forgot the magic words. the thieves returned and killed him. Soon, the thieves discovered that someone else knew their secret, and they set out to find Ali Baba. Through cunning and bravery, especially with the help of a clever servant named Morjana, the thieves were outwitted and defeated. Ali Baba survived, not because of strength, but because of wisdom and restraint. Okay, now these stories, though different, share something profound. Scheherazade survives by never finishing the story. Aladdin rises through illusion, power, and reversal. Ali Baba navigates danger through knowledge and timing. Now, all the stories are dramatic, symbolic, we can say larger than life, meaning they don't happen in the ordinary. They are super, beyond, beyond what is normal in this life. It's larger than life. And yet, these stories endure, not because they are literal history, but because they speak to something deeply human. I heard this when I was young. I remember it even today. And probably if I have a grandchild, I might tell of the same story. Many of you may have passed through that kind of uh, part of your life, and you have heard your parents, if they are wide readers, if they love books, and you might have heard them tell the story. Now, something about where we're going, the book of Revelation. Between story and prophecy, there is a convergence. We have listened to the voice of Scheherazade, a storyteller who mastered the art of suspense, who understood that a story unfinished is a story that lives. I'll repeat. She understood that a story unfinished is a story that lives. We have walked with Aladdin, who rose from obscurity through forces unseen, navigating a world where power, illusion, and reversal shaped his destiny. And we have also stood, accompanied Ali Baba, who survived not by strength, but by awareness, by knowing when to act and when to remain silent. These are not mere stories for children. They are enduring narratives shaped by culture, memory, and the human need to make sense of uncertainty. They are, in their own way, mirrors of the human condition. Even today, friends, we listen to such unending stories. Superman, Spider-Man, the Avengers, of course, some series on TV that have ended already, but they remain for us for a while. Mara Clara, Batang Quiapo. What else? It's not only kids that are fascinated by such stories. It's amazing to find that when Avengers are in the movies, Superman, Spider-Man, it's not kids only that go there. Old men, old women, grown up men and women go and watch. Why? Because their stories are mirrors of the human condition, especially the condition where they hope for something better. And now we turn carefully and respectfully to another narrative, one far more influential, one that has shaped not only imagination, but faith, but belief, expectation, and even fear across generations. The book of Revelation. Traditionally attributed to John the Apostle, written during exile on Patmos, the book of Revelation stands as one of the most vivid and mysterious texts ever composed. In that book, we find that beasts rise, seals are broken, trumpets are sounded, the earth trembles, heaven opens. It is a story that promises a good ending. It speaks of man's quest for better things. It says of tribulation. And it says the end is near. The problem is the story never ends. Just like the 1001 Nights. Perhaps now you see where I'm going. Now you understand why I told you of those stories. But we're not yet done. Let us pause, not to dismiss, but to observe. For in structure, tone, and effect, something begins to emerge. Like the tales of old, the book of Revelation is rich in imagery. The book of Revelation unfolds in a dramatic sequence. It captivates the imagination. It even stirs the emotion, whether it's fear, hope, or anticipation. And most striking of all, it sustains attention across time, just like today. Bombs fall, rockets fly between Iran, Israel, and America. And we pay attention because we have revelation as a backdrop. Like Sheharud's stories in the 1001 Nights, Revelation speaks of what is about to happen, yet it delays its final arrival. Like Aladdin's tale, it presents a world where unseen forces shape visible reality. Like Ali Baba's story, it suggests that survival depends on awareness, interpretation, and response. This does not mean they are the same, but it invites a question, one that must be asked with both courage and humility. When does a prophecy begin to resemble a story? And when does a story begin to function like a prophecy? For centuries, Revelation has been used as a map of the future. Yet, it offers no dates. It offers no fixed timeline, only symbols, sequences, and a sense of urgency that never quite expires. It is always near, so it says, always unfolding, always about to conclude. And so, like the listener before Scheherazade, humanity leans forward, waiting for the conclusion, watching, interpreting signs of the shifting events of history. Each generation asks, is this the moment? Is this the seal? Is this the trumpet? Is this the end? Perhaps then, the power of revelation lies not only in what it predicts, but in what it sustains. It sustains tension, expectation, a story that refuses to close. And here at this quiet intersection between story and prophecy, we must decide how we will read it, how we shall think about the book of Revelation. Is it a literal script of future events? Or is it a symbolic reflection of human struggle? Or as something in between? A grand narrative born from history, shaped by imagination, and carried forward by belief? These questions will guide us as we move deeper into the unfolding drama. For the translation has been told, but what comes next is where the story reaches its most dramatic turn. Tribulation, Armageddon, the second coming, the judgment of the nations, the millennium, the imprisonment of Satan. Many stories involved in this book, connected to each other, expected to happen one after the other. We don't know if it has started already. The book does not tell when. There's no date. And we don't know if it's happening already and when it will end. It has been told in pulpits and whispered in quiet conversations. It has traveled across centuries, crossing cultures and languages, yet somehow retaining the same confident tone, the same orderly sequence, the same inevitable ending. It is the story of the last days. According to the narrative in Revelation, the world will not simply end. It will unfold according to a precise, and predetermined script. First, a time of great suffering will engulf humanity. Chaos, war, famine, and fear on a global scale. Tribulation. Then, at the height of human desperation, the heavens will open. The long awaited Messiah will return. The second coming, Armageddon. No, a final confrontation, Armageddon, will decisively crush the forces of evil according to the script of the story. But the story does not end there. After victory comes judgment. Nations will be gathered, separated, and evaluated. Justice, long delayed, will finally be served. And then, as if to reward the survivors of cosmic upheaval, a 1,000-year reign of Jesus, a 1,000-year reign of peace will begin. A perfect world under divine rule where evil is restrained and harmony restored. It is, by all accounts, a magnificent storyline, complete, sequential, satisfying, almost perfect. Why do I say that? Because after the end of that 1,000-year reign, Satan will be released. To repeat the cycle, perhaps? To make the story never ending? What makes this narrative so compelling is not merely its promise of justice, but its structure. It answers the deepest human questions with remarkable continuity, clarity. When will suffering end? Who will ultimately prevail? Will wrongs be made right? Is there a final chapter to human history? And yet, beneath its confidence lies a quiet tension. Why does an all knowing God, why does an all knowing divine reality require a sequence of events to accomplish what it already knows? Why not shorten the thing? Why must evil be bound, released, and then be defeated again? Why 1,000 years and not just 1 year? Or longer if you want, 1,000,000 years? Why does a perfect ending still require a final rebellion? These are not questions often asked aloud. Perhaps because the story is rarely presented as a story. It is presented as certainty, presented as something real. And this is where this work, this podcast, this series begins. Not in denial of the narrative, but in curiosity about it. Not to ridicule, but to listen more closely, to understand better. Because for all its grandeur, this epic plot revelation bears an uncanny resemblance to something deeply human. A story shaped, retold, refined, and repeated with conviction until it becomes unquestionable, no matter the obvious contradictions. In many cultures, there is a term for such storytelling: rich, confident, embellished, and widely believed. In Filipino, in Tagalog, it is called kwentong barbero. For our English friends, roughly the translation is barber's tall tale. A tale told with authority, a narrative that grows with every retelling. A story that may contain truth, yes, but not always in the way it is presented. What if the most widely accepted account of the end of the world is not a literal script, but a layered narrative? What if the power of revelation lies not in its predictive accuracy, but in what it reveals about the human need for order, justice, and meaning? What if, hidden beneath its dramatic imagery and precise sequence, there lies a deeper truth, one that does not depend on future events, but on present awakening? In the story that follow, we will revisit this grand narrative, not as passive recipients, but as thoughtful listeners. We will walk through the stages: the tribulation and the mark of the beast, Armageddon and the second coming, the judgment of the nations, the millennium, the imprisonment and eventual release of Satan. We will go through all those stories. But this time, we will listen differently. We will pay attention not only to what is said, but how it is said, who said it, why it is said, and what it assumes about reality, divinity, and humanity itself. Let us start with John's timeline. In the book, John uses the words soon and near, and that is our opening clue. Right at the beginning, Revelation says, the revelation of things which must soon take place. Soon. And in another verse, it says, the time is near. That's just in the first chapter of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 1, verse 3. Revelation speaks as though the end is near, yet refuses to say when. It offers durations, but no dates, sequences, but no anchors. It is a clock without hands, ticking loudly, but never telling the time. Was Revelation meant to predict events or to keep people expecting them? Like a TV series, where as long as it sells, the story keep on playing. If you have been reading Revelation, did you notice the storyline goes in circles? Seals, trumpets, bowls of wrath, much like any kwentong barbero told by the barber to different listeners, but with added flavors. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not those that predict the future, but those that quietly reveal the mind of the storyteller. And if we listen carefully enough, we may discover that this epic tale of the end, Revelation, is also a mirror, one that reflects not just the destiny of the world, but the evolving consciousness of those who tell it. And as far as those who tell it, let's turn our attention to the man behind the vision, Old Man John, the seer of Patmos. Before the beast, before the trumpets, before the 1,000 years and the final rebellion, there was a man, an old man. He was called John of Patmos. By the time he wrote what would later be known as the Book of Revelation, tradition holds that he was already advanced in age, perhaps nearing the end of a long and eventful life. Some accounts even suggest that his eyesight has begun to fail, his body worn by years of travel, preaching, and persecution. And now he's alone, banished to a small island in the Aegean Sea, Patmos, a rocky outpost used by the Roman authorities as a place of exile. Now, just a reminder, these things that I am sharing to you are treated exegetically in a pantheistic perspective. By exegetically, we mean first and foremost, look at the background. Background of the book, background of the character, background of the author, know something about the circumstances surrounding the world of the book and the author. And we're doing that right now. So, we look at Patmos, the island of exile. Patmos is not a grand place. It is rugged, wind-swept, quiet. Its terrain is marked by hills of stone, sparse vegetation, and the endless rhythm of waves meeting the shore. The horizon stretches wide, but offers no escape, only distance. For a man in exile, it is both prison and sanctuary. There are no crowds here, no temples bustling with worshippers, no debates in synagogues or marketplaces, only silence, memory, and perhaps imagination. John was not an ordinary man. He was steeped in the language of the prophets, in the visions of Ezekiel, the symbols of Daniel, and the poetic intensity of apocalyptic tradition. His world was already rich with images, beasts, horns, thrones, angels, fire, cosmic upheaval. These were not new inventions. They were inherited symbols, reworked, reimagined, retold. Now, place such a person, such a mind in isolation. Add his age, add his sufferings, add his longing for justice, and add his hopes for divine vindication. What kind of visions and imaginations might emerge from such a man? Here is a quiet question, one that is rarely asked, but lingers beneath the surface. How does an old man, nearly blind, exiled on a remote island, see so clearly into a future that stretches more than 1,000 years? Not just in broad strokes, but in vivid detail. He sees seals being opened. He hears trumpets being sounded. He sees beasts rising from the sea and land. And he sees a final battle called Armageddon. And then a 1,000-year reign. Beyond that, the binding and release of Satan. It is a vision not only expansive, but highly structured, programmed, sequential, layered, dramatic, almost like a story unfolding scene by scene. So we might ask, is that vision or interpretation? Traditionally, traditionally, the answer is expected and simple. They say it's divine revelation. John saw all these things because he was shown. But there is another possibility, one that does not diminish the power of the text, but reframes it. What if John did not see the future in a literal sense, but instead expressed through symbolic language the deepest longings and tensions of his time? He belongs to a persecuted community longing for justice. He lives in a world under imperial power, yearning for reversal. And of course, there is the human desire to believe that chaos will one day be resolved. In this light, the vision becomes less about prediction, but more about interpretation, not of the future, but of the present, projected forward. In many ways, John stands at the edge of modern prophet and storyteller. Like the village barbero, he speaks with authority. Like the ancient sage, he speaks in symbols. Like the poet, he paints with images too powerful to ignore. But unlike a modern historian, he does not explain. He reveals, or perhaps he narrates. So, let us look at John as a man like us, and looking at him as a man is not to diminish him, it is to understand him. Aging, isolated, immersed in a sacred tradition, surrounded by uncertainty, holding on to hope. From such a place, visions do not need to be fabricated. They arise naturally, shaped by memory, belief, and longing. And perhaps that is what makes the book of Revelation so enduring. Not because it offers a precise map of the future, but because it captures something timeless in the human spirit, the need to believe that history is going somewhere, that suffering has an end, that justice will come, and that somehow, beyond the chaos, there is a story of hope. And so we ask, was John a prophet who saw the distant future with divine clarity? Or was he a man who, in the solitude of Patmos, gave voice to humanity's deepest fears and hopes, woven into a narrative so compelling that it would be told, retold, and believed for generations? The answer is not simple, of course. But one thing is certain. Before the epic plot of the last days, there was an old man sitting on a rocky island, looking out at the sea and seeing something. Now, let's look at the island of Patmos. When John the Apostle was exiled there, traditionally about the year 90 to 95, during the reign of Domitian, Patmos was not a mystical place. It was rugged, remote, and somewhat harsh. The island was rocky, barren, desolate. Patmos is a small mountainous island with thin soil, sparse vegetation, jagged hills and cliffs. It wasn't fertile like parts of mainland Asia. Life there required endurance. It's a place of exile. It has a small population. It was quiet. It was harsh. But yes, it offers a meditative environment. For a reflective mind, it could feel like the edge of the world. Daily life there is basic survival routines, walking rugged paths, watching the sea and the sky, long hours of solitude. This is important. The environment itself encourages visions, reflections, and symbolic thinking. Patmos is about 50 to 60 kilometers away from the mainland. So while it feels remote, it is not extremely far, maybe, depending on the attitude of the person, but it's close enough for Romans to control, yet far enough to isolate a person psychologically and socially. The real question then is, how could John see the future? Now, the real question is not how could John see the future, but what happens to the human mind when it is left alone in old age with memory, fear, hope, and empire? In Tagalog, I would say, or in Ilocano, I would say, makapabagtit gayam. In such condition, how can old John even write? And so, friends, let me do an Arabian Nights act for a while. Let me copy the style of Sheheruts. I'll stop, hang for a while, not finish the story, so that you will hear me again the next time around. And let me give you a perspective of where this podcast is going. Consider today as just the introduction. The next episode, we will now talk about the tribulation. I know you would like to hear that story. And in anticipation, a simple request, please hit that subscribe button, follow, and share so that there will be more of us sharing this story so that more will know about what is Revelation really all about. Is it prophecy or kwentong barbero regarded as prophecy? Again, it's not to diminish the importance of the Bible. I'm making the Bible as our text, but with another treatment. I'm trying to share it to you in a pantheistic perspective. So, once again, thank you for being with me. Until next time, God bless.